you have reached the age of clarity. It is a quiet, unsentimental place where the noise of societal expectation finally fades into the background. Your family looks at you with a mixture of pity and confusion. They see a successful man, a man of means and stability who has decided to let the fire of his romantic life go cold. They call it bitterness. They call it a midlife crisis. But you know the truth. You haven't lost your way, you've found your calculator. For decades, you operated under the sunk cost fallacy. You believed that if you just provided more, protected more, and tolerated more, the partnership would eventually yield the peace you were promised. You were the primary shareholder in a venture that required 100% of your emotional capital while providing a volatile, unpredictable return. You were told that a man's worth is measured by how much of himself he can sacrifice on the altar of a we. Then, the transition happened. Perhaps it was a messy exit from a long marriage, or perhaps it was a series of dates that felt more like job interviews for a position you didn't want. Regardless of the catalyst, the result was the same. The fog of biological urgency lifted. For the first time in your life, you looked at a potential relationship not as a necessity for happiness, but as a business merger. You began to audit the costs. You factored in the emotional tax, the constant labor of managing another human being's internal weather. You accounted for the autonomy levy, the gradual erosion of your right to decide how your time and resources are spent. When you looked at the final numbers, the result was undeniable. The price of admission into a modern relationship has become astronomical, while the quality of the product has plummeted. You realized that you were being asked to trade your hard-won peace for a companionship that felt more like a second job. This isn't a retreat, it is a strategic withdrawal. The high-value man chooses to stay single because he has finally learned to value his own life as much as he was taught to value the approval of others. He has looked at the ROI of modern romance and realized that the only winning move is not to play. For most of your life, you were a passenger in a vehicle driven by chemistry. You didn't choose your obsessions, they were hardwired into your marrow. When you were 25, the biological imperative was an absolute dictator. Your endocrine system didn't care about your long-term peace or your financial security. It cared about the continuation of the species. It flooded your brain with dopamine and testosterone, creating a temporary insanity that made you overlook every red flag and tolerate every indignity. You were a slave to the hunt, driven by a primal need for validation and intimacy that felt as essential as oxygen. But then, the quiet arrived. As a high-value man ages, the biological noise begins to subside. This isn't a medical failure, it is a neurological promotion. The hormonal fog that once distorted your vision has cleared, leaving behind a cold, crystalline perspective. You are no longer looking at the world through the lens of hunger. You are looking at it through the lens of merit. The biological horizon is the point where your logic finally overtakes your libido. From this vantage point, you can observe the game with the detached curiosity of a scientist. You see the maneuvers, the subtle manipulations, and the demands for attention for what they truly are. Attempts to colonize your mental space. Without the hormonal override, the trade-off becomes laughable. Why would you sacrifice your silence for a conversation that adds no value? Why would you surrender your schedule to satisfy someone else's fear of being alone? We call this the sovereign state of the mind. It is the moment you realize that the validation of a stranger is a cheap currency compared to the respect you have for yourself. You are no longer performing. You are no longer auditioning. You have stepped off the stage entirely, and for the first time in your existence, you are the one holding the script. You aren't broken. You are finally, after a lifetime of biological service, free. The world measures the success of a partnership by what is visible: the shared vacations, the social media facade, the stability of a dual-income household. But as a man of experience, you have learned to account for the overhead they never mention. you have felt the weight of the invisible tax. The invisible tax is the constant, grinding cognitive load of managing another person's reality. It is the mental energy required to scan the horizon for potential triggers, to anticipate moods before they manifest, and to navigate the minefield of unspoken expectations. For years, you functioned as a psychological janitor. You cleaned up emotional messes you didn't create. You absorbed the stress of her workplace, the drama of her social circle, and the existential anxieties she refused to process on her own. You were the emotional ballast for a ship that was perpetually taking on water. You remember the tactical assessment, that moment of hesitation before you turned the key in your own front door. You would pause, listening to the silence, trying to gauge the atmospheric pressure inside. Was it a quiet day, or was it the silence before a storm? You were a guest in your own life, constantly adjusting your volume, your opinions, and your very presence to maintain a fragile equilibrium. This is the labor they tell you is part of the job. But you have looked at the job description again and realized the contract is predatory. High-value men are choosing to stay single because they have discovered the luxury of mental surplus. When you stop being responsible for the internal weather of another person, your energy returns to you. Your focus sharpens. The bandwidth once dedicated to conflict resolution and emotional diplomacy is suddenly available for your own pursuits, your own health, and your own growth. The silence of your home is no longer a vacuum to be filled. It is a sanctuary. You have retired from the role of the unpaid therapist. You have stopped paying the tax. And in the absence of that burden, you have found a level of performance and clarity that no companionship could ever justify. The marketplace of modern intimacy is not a forum for connection. It is a theater of the absurd. If you are a high-value man who has conquered his field, secured his borders, and refined his character, the digital dating landscape will feel less like a search for a partner and more like a liquidation sale of your dignity. You step into the arena, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of a lingering sense of should, and you find yourself reduced to a series of pixels on a glowing screen. You are a man of substance, yet you are being filtered by the same algorithms used to sell fast fashion. You are competing with hundreds of ghosts for the attention of people who have mistaken their presence for a personality. In this theater, the roles are strictly defined. You are expected to be the protagonist, the producer, and the financier. You are auditioning for the role of the stabilizer. You meet women who have spent decades avoiding the mirror, who have externalized every failure of their past, and who now present you with a list of requirements that read like a corporate merger. They seek financial security to fund their unearned retirement. They seek emotional availability to sponge up their unresolved trauma. They seek a partner who is low maintenance, while they themselves are a full-time job. We call this the entitlement paradox. They bring the baggage of a lifetime, yet they expect you to be the one who unpacks it. They offer the gift of their company as if it were a rare commodity, failing to realize that for a man who already enjoys his own company, the price is simply too high. You look at the prize on offer, a relationship defined by negotiation, compromise, and the inevitable erosion of your standards, and you realize the absurdity of the wager. You are being asked to trade a life of hard-won excellence for a role in someone else's unfinished drama. The high-value man doesn't leave the table because he's afraid he'll lose. He leaves because he's realized that even if he wins, he's still losing. You have built a fortress, not a prison. People look at your quiet life and see a void, but you see a masterpiece of intentionality. You have become the architect of peace. Every brick of your current existence was laid with the cold understanding that your time is the only non-renewable resource you possess. Think about your mornings now. There is no negotiation over the thermostat, no management of someone else's caffeine-deprived irritability, and no hidden agenda for your Saturday. Your schedule is a blank canvas, not a compromise. You have rediscovered the parts of yourself that were amputated to fit into the cramped box of a suitable partner. You are working on your craft again. You are traveling on your terms. You are breathing without permission. We are the men who have realized that loneliness is a ghost story told to keep us in line. True loneliness is not being alone in a quiet house. It is being alone while sitting across the table from someone who doesn't see you, yet expects you to see only them. You have escaped that phantom. You have traded the frantic noise of a failing partnership for the profound resonance of your own purpose. Your health is improving because the chronic cortisol of constant conflict has finally evaporated. Your bank account is stable because you are no longer subsidizing a lifestyle you didn't choose. Your legacy is no longer tied to being a provider for an ungrateful audience, but to the quality of the man you have become in the silence. So, let them whisper. Let the married men mock you from their cages of resentment. Let the world fear your independence. When they ask if you're afraid to die alone, you can smile with the terrifying clarity of a man who has already conquered his fears. You aren't choosing to die alone. You are choosing to live free. And in the end, that is the only victory that remains. You are done. And for the first time in your life, you are complete.